Guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. And today, guys, we're reading more Ranger in Time. And so, guys, let's get started with Journey Through Ash and Smoke. Ranger in Time, Journey Through Ash and Smoke. And we're gonna get started on Chapter 7. Chapter 7, The Cliff Over the Sea. Father set out at dawn the next morning on his brother's horse, leaving Rasta for Helga and Gunnar to use while he was gone. Helga waved into the pink light until she couldn't see her father anymore. Then she hurried out to the rubbish pile. She knelt down beside Ranger with a handful of dried fish. I've brought you some breakfast. Ranger sniffed. It was very fishy, but he was very hungry, so he gobbled it down. Funi ate his too. Then he pawed at the fence. Helga leaned over and lifted him out. The pup celebrated his freedom by racing around the longhouse twice, stopping to bat at Ranger's tail for a while, and racing around again. Helga laughed. I see you're happy to be out, but we have to work. We have a lot of work to do with Father away. You can both come with me to the cliffs to gather puffin eggs with Thora. The sky was perfect blue as they started on the path. Helga led Ranger and Funi through the rocky area where she'd gone searching for Rasta the day before. In the sunshine, it was hard to imagine how she'd gotten so lost. But when the weather changed here, it happened fast and fierce. Ranger stayed close to Helga, but Funi raced around the rocks. He scampered over a craggy bridge, slid down into the shadowy tunnel, and popped up through a mossy opening farther along. He wants us to chase him, Helga said, laughing. Ranger didn't want to chase anybody. He wanted to do his work so he could go home. But Ranger took off running, and Ranger followed her. His paw was still tender from the scratches he got the day before, so he tried to avoid the sharp rocks by staying on the damp, mossy areas. Ranger padded down a small hill onto one of those deep green patches. The moss felt cool and soft under his paws, but suddenly the ground collapsed underneath him. Ranger landed in a dark, rocky place a few feet below and yelped. Oh, are you all right, dog? Helga peered down at him. Ranger was hurt badly, but he'd landed hard, and his paws stung again. He barked up at her. You must have stepped where the moss was covering a hole. You have to watch out for that. Here, Helga lay down on her belly and reached down into the darkness. Come on, jump up. Ranger wasn't sure if he could jump high enough to get out of the hole, but before he could try, Helga slid down, wrapped her arms around his middle, and hoisted him up onto his solid ground. Then she found a foothold in the rocks and climbed out herself. She brushed the mud from her hands. Ready to go now? Ranger kept to the bare rocks. After that, his paws were sore, but he didn't trust the moss anymore. Helga reached down and scratched his head as they walked. Ranger leaned into his hand, but he didn't feel quite right about it. He was supposed to have rescued Helga, not the other way around. As they approached the seaside cliffs, Helga spotted her favorite flowers, purple, white, and yellow blossoms that grew right out the stones. When they'd first arrived, Helga wondered how anything could grow in a stark wind-blown place, But Mother had told her that when a seed settles to earth, if it's tough, it can make the rocky shore into home. Mother promised that Helga, too, could grow where she had landed. Helga had tried to do that, working to help her family and learning to call his new land home. But she missed her family and neighbors back in Norway. At least Dora was here, but she was so busy caring for younger brothers that she rarely had time to spend with Helga. At least they could collect eggs together, and it was a perfect day for that. The path to the cliffs was muddy, and otherwise there was no sign of wild weather from the day before. There was no more threatening clouds, only a few bright puffs of white. One reminded Helga of a horse, but with extra legs trailing into the blue. Look, she pointed and traced its outline with a finger. Perhaps that is Sleipnir in the sky. Father had told us about Sleipnir, the eight-legged horse ridden by Odin, the god of wisdom in war. Odin ruled Valhalla, where warriors went if they died a brave death. Helga's grandfather had been killed in a battle before she was born. He'd gone off with the Valkyries, Father said. They were warrior women who searched battlefields for dead heroes and carried them to Valhalla. Helga liked imagining her grandfather there with Odin, drinking mead and eating fattened pigs. But she'd still wished she could have had time with him in this world. She couldn't help feeling jealous of Odin and his strange-looking horse in the sky. By the time Helga looked away from the clouds, they'd almost reached the top of the cliffs. Waves pounded the smooth, round stones below. Sometimes Helga and Thora scrambled down the rocky path to fish from the beach. But today they would hunt from above. Helga looked down the path toward the lake. There was no sign of Thora yet, but she could start on her own. Helga pulled a long coil of walrus skin rope from her woolen bag and turned toward the cliff. Funi leaped at the rope and grabbed it with both front paws. Helga was so surprised she dropped it, and Funi wrestled it in the dirt as if it were alive. Nice hunting, Helga laughed. She took the rope and held it out to Funi's reach. I'm sorry, but I need this. You'll have to play with something else. Funi went back to swatting Ranger's tail while Helga tied one of the rope around a strong rocky crag near the top of the cliff. She looped the other end around her waist, tied it into a knot, and pulled it tight. Then she walked to the edge of the cliff and peered over. The puffins were active, flying in and out of their nest in the craggy rocks, bringing fish to their partners. It would be a good day to collect eggs. Helga leaned a little farther over the edge for a better look. Ranger pawed at the muddy ground and whined. She was making him nervous, so close to the edge like that. Sometimes Luke and Sadie's family had picnics at the park with a stream and high waterfall. Their mom never let them get close to the edge like this. Ranger wished she were here now to make Helga come back to where it was safer. But Ranger was on his own. He barked and pawed the ground again. Helga looked back at him. "It's all right, dog," she said. "I'm good at egg hunting." Then she stepped over the edge of the cliff and disappeared. Chapter 8. Puffins in Play. Ranger barked carefully. He inched his way to the top of the cliff and looked over. There was Helga, holding the rope around her waist, with one hand reaching into a crevice with the other. Fat black and white birds flew all around her, darting in and out of the nest. Helga pulled a cream-colored egg from an empty nest and held it up. Then she tucked it into a bag strapped on to her side, pushed off the rocks with her feet, and swung herself back to another spot along the cliff. Soon Thora came hurrying down the path. She walked right to the edge to the cliff and called down to Helga. "Good hunting today?" "Very good." Helga plucked another egg from the nest, and tucked it into her bag. "Come down." She pushed off the rocks with her legs and swung to another spot, while Thora tied her own rope and lowered herself to join her cousin. Ranger watched them dangling and swinging for a few minutes. Then he stepped back from the edge. Helga and Thora seemed fine, but watching him down there was making his neck feel all prickly. He turned away from the sea and went to sniff some other rocks. They smelled like mice or voles might live under them. Mice, Ranger decided, but different from the home mice that snuck into the mudroom when the weather got cold in the fall. Ranger sniffed again and heard a frightening yelp behind him. Funi was pawing frantically at the ground, searching and clawing at the loose rocks and mud while his hind legs dangled over the edge of the cliff. Ranger raced back. The earth here was unstable. Ranger felt the rocks and dirt shifting, but there was no time to find careful footing. He lunged forward, grabbed the scruff of Funi's neck in his teeth, and yanked the pup back onto the ledge. Funi yipped at Ranger and shook himself. Ranger stepped between Funi and the edge and nudged the pup away from the cliff. Then Ranger sat down, keeping watch. Every time Funi started to stand up, a big golden paw pushed him down again. It wasn't long before Helga's head appeared over the edge of the cliff. She hoisted herself up on the rope, untied it from the rocks, and began to coil it around her arm. Funi jumped up to race to her side and swiped at the end of the rope with a paw. "Have you been waiting for us?" Helga laughed. She dangled her rope and swung it back and forth as she waited for Thora to climb up too. Funny, Funi leaped and pounced and batted and swatted until he was all tired out. The girls coiled their ropes and tucked them into woolen sacks. "Not a bad day at all," Thora said, patting her lumpy bag. Helga reached into her own bag and pulled out a smooth white egg. She cracked it on the rock, tipped her head back, and poured the gooey insides into her mouth. Then she knelt by the smooth-topped rock with a little indentation and said, "Here." She cracked another egg and spilled its contents onto the rock. Funi started lapping it up, but Helga pulled him back a bit. "You have to share." Ranger stepped up to the rock and licked at the egg stuff. He had bites of Luke's eggs on Sunday mornings sometimes. This was different, cold and runny, but still good. When Ranger and Funi had finished their egg, Helga and Thora started down the path to the beach. The girls descended the rugged cliff quickly, as if it were just a few easy stairs. Funi zipped ahead of them, pouncing from rock to rock. Ranger went more slowly. He was heavier, and some of those stones crumbled and shifted as he eased down the bank. He didn't like walking on earth that moved under his paws, but he took his time, and soon he jumped down onto the beach. Helga picked up a smooth, round stone and tossed it into shallow waves. Funi raced after it, and Ranger did too. The water was cold, but it felt good. Helga and Thora carefully laid down their sacks of eggs, took off their shoes, and waded into. They splashed in the foamy water. As the tide came in, Funi pranced along them until a wave swept his paws out from under him. The little fox scampered to the beach and shook the salty spray from his fur. The swells were growing bigger. Each wave seemed to break a little stronger than the last. Ranger barked and backed up onto the wet rocks. He didn't like the way the current was tugging at him. He wanted the girls to come out where it was shallower, where it was safe. Ranger barked again. Thora turned to look at him. "What is it, dog? Don't you like the water?" Helga turned to look at Ranger too. Neither girl saw the huge wave going behind them. Ranger pawed at the stones and barked again, just as the wave broke and knocked Thora from her feet. Helga whirled around when she heard the wave crash. Her cousin was gone. "Thora!" She plunged into the water, diving headfirst into the breaking wave. Ranger barked. Now Helga was gone too. They were both in danger. Ranger pawed at the sands. How could he possibly find them in the wild, foaming waves? Ranger looked up at the path from the beach. There was no time to run for help. They were too far from the house. His only hope was to fight the ocean on his own. Ranger turned back to the sea and plunged into the waves. Just as Helga rose above the water, she had an arm wrapped around Thora as she splashed up onto the beach. The girls collapsed as the smooth stones. Ranger raced to their side and found them dripping, out of breath and laughing. "That was the biggest wave I've seen since the afternoon we first arrived," Helga said, brushing her dripping hair from her eyes. "That day I was the one who got knocked over, remember? I owed you a rescue." "Consider the debt paid," Thora said, hugging her cousin. Funi trotted over and pounced on the girls, laughing, and pulled him into their circle. Then Helga reached out a hand to Ranger. "Here, dog. Everything's all right." Ranger stepped up to Helga and let her scratch his wet head, but he kept a close eye on the rising water. Soon the girls stood up and Helga said, "We'd better take the eggs home." She and Thora collected their sacks. They walked up the path together a ways. Then said goodbye and set off toward their own families' longhouses. Ranger and Funi walked with Helga, but Funi kept racing off on his own. Finally, Helga scooped him up and carried him under her arm, and reached down with her other hand, stroked Ranger's salty wet, and as they walked, Ranger's heart had finally stopped pounding. But he missed Luke and Sadie. He missed his yard and home eggs and his dog bed in the mudroom. This strange rocky place confused him. What was his job here supposed to be? Helga didn't seem to need his help. She was better at rescuing them than he was. How was he supposed to save someone who was so good at taking care of herself? And if Ranger couldn't help, how would he find his way home? Chapter 9. Sparks in the Sky. Helga smiled at the way home. Her father had only been gone a day, but she was doing a fine job tending to things so far. She'd brought home more than enough eggs for the evening meal. How pleased Mother would be! But when Helga pulled open the door to the longhouse, her mother was wailing. "What's wrong?" Helga set the sack of eggs by the door and ran to her mother's sleeping bench. Mother sat hunched over with one hand on her bulging belly, the other on her lower back. "The baby's coming sooner than we thought," Asa said. She'd stood beside Helga's mother, stroking her hair. Asa's face was worried, and Helga understood why. Her mother had lost babies before, when they were born too early. If it happened again, her father might never get this boy to help on the farm. Helga might never have a brother or sister of her own. "Mother," Helga said, "can I do anything for you?" Mother caught her breath and looked up at Helga, her forehead glistening with sweat. Her eyes looked tired, but she tried to smile. "Not now, but soon you will have a brother or sister." Helga felt a joy of excitement, but it turned to a nervous twist in her stomach when her mother cried out again. Helga looked up at Asa. "Father should be here." Asa shook her head. "All is well. I brought my sister's children into the world back in Norway," she said. "Your mother is strong. Your father can meet the child when he returns, but I will need your help." "Of course," Helga said. "I'll fetch water from the spring." She wasn't sure Asa needed water, but she didn't think she could stand to stay listening to Mother cry in pain. Helga was halfway to the cool spring near the lake when the ground rumbled again. Ranger and Funi, who'd been trotting along beside her, stopped and pricked up their ears. "Did you feel that?" Helga asked, when the earth was steady under her feet. Again, Helga walked on to the spring and bent to fill her pail. Helga walked up to the spring and bent to fill her pail. Just as she finished, the sky grumbled. At first, Helga thought it was another storm, but the sky had been blue all day. Then she looked up and gasped. A wall of sharp sparks shot up from the earth beyond the black rocks in the east. It looked as if the entire sky might catch fire. Helga had seen plumes of smoke before, when the earth rumbled and spit, but nothing like this. Nothing so big or so close. She whirled to Ranger and Funi. "Come, we must tell Asa and Mother." Helga walked as quickly as she could without sloshing all the water from her pail. When she neared the longhouse, she could hear her mother's cries through the turf walls. Helga took a deep breath and went inside. Asa looked up. "She is struggling. What a clean cloth for her forehead to cool her." Helga did that while she described to Asa what she'd seen. The very earth is splitting fire," she said. "The ground is still rumbling." Funi wandered off to sniff some bones in the refuse pile, but Ranger stayed close to Helga's side. He didn't like this trembling under his paws. It felt like the earth might tear open and swallow them all. Asa left Helga's mother for a moment to look out the door. Then she returned. Her voice was urgent. Your father must come home at once, she told Helga. Your uncle will have to ride to the Althing and find him. Take Rasta to your uncle's farm and tell him that I can go myself, Helga said. She wanted to help her mother. She wanted the baby to be born safely. I heard father talking with mother about the way he would go. I can ride it in less than a day. You must not go alone, mother murmured, but she could barely keep her eyes open. Asa looked at Helga and hesitated. It would be faster, much faster. What if I ride all the way to my uncle's farm and no one is home? Helga reached out for a wooden sack. She took out the eggs and filled the bag with dried fish and mutton grain and a bladder for drinking. She would leave before there could be more discussion. When Helga finished packing, she returned to her mother's bench. Asa was striking jasper and flint together to light a fish oil lamp. The first sparks flew from the stone and disappeared, but when the twisted strands of cotton grass caught fire, the flame flickered on Mother's pale face, and she opened her eyes. I won't be gone long, Mother, Helga whispered. Then Father will be here for you, too. Her mother nodded weakly and reached out a hand. Helga squeezed it, then turned to go. She lifted her woolen bag and she over her shoulder, scooped Funi up from the rubbish pile, and tucked him into a sling against her overdress. Ranger followed her to the door. Wait, the winds will be cold in the mountains. Take your father's heavier cloak. Asa wrapped the too big cloak around Helga's shoulders, then bit her lip. It makes you look so small, Asa said quietly. You should wait until morning at least. The days are long now, and the nights short. I have to travel far in darkness, and the sooner I go, the sooner I can return with Father, Helga said, and headed out the door. She wished she felt as brave as her words. Chapter 10, guys. So, guys, we're going to end this video right here, guys. And, I hope you enjoyed. Bye. See you next time.